What happens when your story is shaped not only by place or purpose, but by the quiet, faithful presence of God woven through memory, culture, and the meals that gather us? Today on Lead with Storytelling, I'm joined by Jenn Suen Chen. I hope I got that
You did.
pronunciation right. And I know you do have a Chinese name, but we'll get into that later. A spiritual director, speaker, and author whose new book, Dumplings and Faith, offers a tender meditation on food, faith, family, and the power of story to heal. Jenn Chen is a spiritual director, speaker, and leader in the areas of spiritual formation and cross cultural ministry. She's the co director of Summit Claire, an organization she leads with her husband John, where they offer spiritual direction, mentoring, and leadership coaching to those engaged in cross cultural work. Jenn spent 25 years living and raising a family in Asia and now lives in the Pacific Northwest, where she continues to work alongside leaders and workers navigating the deep and often complex terrain of calling, faith, and cultural connection. What I've also always found compelling about Jen is the quiet depth of she brings into every space, whether she's offering spiritual direction, sharing her own story, or simply holding space for others to reflect. Her life is one of deep listening, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too, both to God and to others. And you hear that in our conversation. Today, we talk about the role of formation in leadership, storytelling, the stories that shape us and as we cross cultures, and how spiritual direction can help us pay attention to God's presence in our everyday lives. Let's dive in. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Thank you so much for making it.
I'm so glad it worked out.
So just before we hit record, I was gushing over the beauty of this work, and and I hope I also impressed the relevance of the work as well as a tool for guidance. Um, I spoke a little about my first impressions, but I think the meat of my review for the book was is really telling the story is how um, dim sum and faith um, first resonates with me, not just as a podcaster or as the host of any storytelling conversations around storytelling, but also personally as someone who looks out and tries to sharpen his eyes for how the stories that we tell, and the stories especially that I tell and I tell my children or my friends or anyone around me or anyone I meet, how it helps to heal, how I'm very particular about the power of those words that I use to elevate, to lift people up, to push people forward, to articulate, to clarify, to basically just be a light to myself and to everyone or any community that I find myself. And what I found fascinating about really inspiring about this book is how it talks about storytelling as a tool to heal, but also a tool um, that becomes a sort of mirror for how we see ourselves, how we, articulate our identity or affirm our identity in Christ, and a few other things, elements around storytelling. Who is the hero? Whether or not you are the hero, it's going to be a shocker to a lot of people when they talk about, this is my life story, I'm the hero in it. But guess what? I one of the beautiful germs I've taken from this book is you don't always have to be the hero in your own story, right?
Yeah.
But again, like I said before, thank you so much, Jen, for this beautiful work. And I know anyone who picks this up will be inspired. And I hope that they
Mm,
take all the treasures that you've shared in it and help
mm.
themselves in their spiritual formation. So thank you once again.
Thank you. It's really humbling to hear that and a little hard because, yeah, but I feel very grateful. Thank you.
Well, you did share very hard lessons here. I mean, not really hard lessons, but the hard lessons that you had to learn. I mean, um, was there a moment when you sensed God inviting you to share these reflections in written form? I mean, at what point did you did you
Mm.
know that I really have to share this story or these stories?
Yeah. I think I'm a storyteller at heart. Um, my parents would say I've been telling stories since I was young. But I think as I got older and I had just people in my life just saying, you need to write these out, I think I found that the book really emerged as just an obedience to just a word that I felt like God was saying, just would you write this and offer it to my people, just as a little offering. And, initially I just wanted to write it for my kids and for those that I journey alongside, just as like a little companion guide to some of the things that I talk about. And I think sometimes we need a story to kind of help us hang maybe principles, or when we talk about growing in, let's say, our faith, like what does that even mean? So much of what we talk about is so meta, but it's like, how do we drop it into our stories? How do we apply it? So um, I think it was just emerged over time, and just growing as a reflective person. Just my my son was saying that every place I go becomes a place of story for me, even if it's just the grocery store. Funny things happen, and I just am paying attention to the people or myself or God's voice. And I think the ordinary spaces can be transformed into sacred and extraordinary, if we just pay attention.
Speaking of paying attention, there was a part of the book where you talked about how God's grace goes before us, and to use your
Mm,
words, you said our value is not so much about what we present to God or how we serve
mm,
God, or
mhm,
because part of the cultural um, codes that are built into us from our training. And you
mhm.
and I, you and I have a commonality
Yeah,
in that
I
we are
love it.
immigrants, and
Hmm.
we both know, the pressures of being an immigrant, how it impacts us and the way we see ourselves, the way we ask for help or
Hmm.
predispose ourselves to ask for help. But
Hmm.
at the very core of our being, we often try to mirror those very hard pressures that we put ourselves through into
Hmm.
how we also, face God. And again, to come back to what you said in your book, where you said our value is not necessarily defined by how we serve God, because His
Hmm.
grace is already available for us. And
Yes.
that called to mind for me the concept of prevenient grace, where
Mm.
we, even before we ask for it, it's already
It's
available.
already there. Yes.
So my question is, how has this cross cultural ministry really deepened your understanding of of this grace?
Mm. I think that's such a good question, and I'll try to be succinct. I'm not very good at that. Um, but I think just the idea that we move from a space of being loved. We were loved first. I think that's how I begin my time when I meet with anyone, is just we just have to acknowledge that we were loved first. And that itself, to pause and wait and let that reality sink in. It's a lifetime, I think, of learning what that means. But if I was loved first and his grace was there before, then I just need to show up with him. And so our moving overseas and raising a family while serving in Asia, I think it was just remembering, like, God, you were there already before me. No one needed me to come. And yet there is an invitation to come and participate, to live that part of that season, a very long season of my life overseas, and to experience God's presence through people, and a meeting, a returning to the culture that I wouldn't have ever been able to know deeply, and to walk that with this truth of being first loved, and to be a recipient of such grace and such belonging. When we move from that place, then what we can present and give to people is love and grace and belonging. And it's not the try harder, do more, be better, fix yourself, which is just out there. And it's so wrapped up in Christianity, it's wrapped up in faith, that we somehow our serving brings belonging, when we have to realize our belonging came first. And what would it look like to live as people, as God's children, to live from that place first? And then our service just comes out of that.
Yeah, so beautiful. And I know, still speaking about service and being, and coming as ourselves, the way we are, with what we have.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's a recurring theme in the writing, and also I think your life, where about showing up with what you have, even when it feels small. And I remember this
Mm-hmm.
part of your book where you made this, I would say, very powerful reference to the story of Queen Esther. And
Mm.
she, from the beginning of her story, always seemed, not underestimating more or less, but I know she offered herself in service of her people. I'm doing this
Mm-hmm.
for my people. But when it came to when it matters, and she questioned, what should I do? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what, I know I've come this far, but it seems the mindset that has brought me this far cannot seem to take me beyond this point, in terms of
Mm.
how I can serve even better.
Mm.
Then the passage that you shared in regards to Queen Esther's story seemed so resonant, because many times when a lot of people speak to me and they ask themselves or ask me, I don't know what my story is, and
Mm. Mm.
don't know what to do with my story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite is a counterintuitive, or almost a no-brainer, because in very little ways, your story, no matter who you are, where you are, or where you are in your life, once shared, becomes a source of inspiration, a source of
Yes.
liberation, just like Queen Esther's
Mm.
was. And I remember the caution to Queen Esther, the exhortation to her, was to use her small voice to liberate her people.
Mhm. Mm.
And while I'm saying thank you for that very beautiful story,
Mm.
my question is, how can we use our story to speak life into
Mm.
other people's situations?
Oh, that's so good. I just, I think it starts from a knowing that our story matters, that there's not one moment in our life that God has not seen, that there is no person that is more important and better at it. I think we're all just have to start somewhere. And we all have something to bring. If there's anything that I want my readers or anybody that I meet with, is like, your life matters. And I think from the beginning of time, that has been the lie from the enemy, that your life doesn't matter. And I think we're fighting it for our whole life to image God in the way that we were meant to, each so uniquely. And so I think it comes from a place of really identity, of really, and I think it's not like a one time, like, oh, I know he loves me. But I think I wrote it, in there, just my own continued journey of coming to know the love of God. And as one who knows she's loved, but then continues to know, experience, and identify where, because I think that it's love that comes and is enough to chase away the fear that my story doesn't count, or I'm too broken, or I'm too far gone. That's such a lie, because none of us, as long as there's breath in our lungs, we still have voice. Every one of us does. And I think in a world that really, like, we value the expert, we value people that have it together, and people are making stuff up all the time. And yet we still listen to them. And I think when we show up just ourselves, like, I just had coffee with my daughter-in-law this morning, and it's fresh. That's what I can bring. And I love her so much. And we just talked about how we just can bring what we have, where I am at the present moment. And it isn't like, oh, I figured it out, but it's like, it's unfolding right now. And we each brought a story, and we weren't trying, but I think it's been the practice of these many years of journeying together. And so I think we just have to try. We just open our mouth. And I think we help each other. We bear witness. Like, I see you growing, or I see how that is hard. It's not that I can fix it, right? I think it also brings up the idea that we're so uncomfortable with hard and pain. So if I'm not careful, my discomfort can leak out and stop you from finishing your story. And so it takes a real groundedness to say, ooh, I can feel my own stuff stirring in me, and I don't want her to be in pain, but I'm going to be here because I know God is here. God is present with us here. So I don't have to go in and fix, which, I think I might just continue to try and do for my whole life. And the honesty of, like, I so don't want you to be in pain. I think really, when you look at every parent, every spouse, I mean, we just don't want a friend. We don't want each other to have pain. But pain and sorrow and longing is just part of our human experience. And part of every story.
I mean, what story is incomplete without a little tension or a little conflict?
That's
I mean,
right.
It speaks so much to the bare bones of storytelling, which is, how are you changed by this one moment? Every moment you're making a decision.
Yeah.
And one of the decisions or the thought processes that go into making decisions, really, I would say, you got me. I mean, there are so many points in this book where, I felt like I've been punched in the stomach, and I had to stop and really ponder, because it got me thinking or rethinking many things that I wondered about myself or about my life. And one of them, I believe, was in chapter 13, where chapter 13, where you you kind of quoted Lauren King, and her quote, really took my breath away. And she said, you don't need to be a hero. Just be who you are today and show up. And that got me. I quickly remembered, if anyone has read or followed the Lord of the Rings in the Return of the King,
Mm.
the last part of the trilogy, where Frodo tells Sam that there would be no Frodo without Sam. And
Mm.
everyone has always wondered, because I personally believe that Frodo was one of the most annoying characters in that story. But he's supposed to be more or less the protagonist or the hero.
Mhm.
But has anyone ever wondered how Sam could have perceived himself or his role in that
Mm.
story? In that story, not as the hero in his, but as an enabler for someone else to have a moment.
Mm.
And when I read this part, I remember that scene, and I was like, yes, here it is. Here is the problem, because this kind of ties to what you said earlier about a lot of people feeling the pressure to feel like they need to be better. They need to, you know, get a one up on someone else, or even get another moment, another high, looking out for the next high. You need to be
Mm.
pristine, present is very clean, facade and everything. And I believe it ties into, or it's, emanates from a culture that celebrates main character mindsets or hero mindsets.
Yes.
um, what would you say to someone who is wrestling with the need to be the hero
Mm.
of their own story? I mean, and how has God, reframed that narrative in your own life?
Mm. So, gee, that's so good. I need to remember that to for some more reflection.
I will
I
send you the
think
recording.
this idea that being the main character, it seems to be that, it's out there and in a lot of conversations I have. And I think it's not entirely bad. I think the desire to learn to take up space, to learn to find our voice. I think coming from a collective culture, when I think about main character, I think about the people around me. I think about the teams I've been on, the people I work with, my family, my community, and I can't actually think of myself, my life, without thinking about people who I have come alongside and who I get to be part of. And yet, um, I guess when we think about the main character, we are of our perhaps our own life, but that's all. So we're bringing a sense of grounded self that knows she's loved, knows he's loved, and we bring this in, then I'm okay being small if I need to be. I'm okay not being seen in that way that maybe is that energy of like see me, pick me, but this idea of like I am seen. Oh, by the creator of the universe, loved first. So then that allows me to just show up as I am. And if it means someone notices me, I'm okay. If it means I'm picked or I'm not, even as I was writing, I thought, you told me, God, to write this as an offering. We never knew where it was going to go. So in my mind, I was like, we can go to Office Depot, print it out, staple it, and hand it to my kids. Like, send it as a PDF. I mean, I don't care. So there was no like, this is going to move in any place. It was just an offering. Like, I will do this much. This is what I see. And I think that, but there's a sense of taking up space that's there that is really my confidence, maybe not always it needs to be in myself, and I mean, there's a way it presents as self-confidence, but this idea that I'm confident as daughter of the king, so loved. So how someone treats me or how I'm perceived, maybe, well, will always somewhat be there. I will always wonder. I think that's to be human, but it doesn't drive me. That you and I are having this conversation, if that's all that happens today, that's enough. I'm blessed by it. And if it goes out to anybody and one person is blessed, I think that's good. I'd be that would be such a gift. But there's so much freedom in that. But I think it is, all the epigraphs in in the book are written by friends. They're all personal. As I was looking at the men and women who have been part of my journey, who have been so important, just important voices and speakers of truth and grace. And that was really important to me to mine, to get their experience. And um, they're my heroes, and I can't tell my story without them.
That's beautiful. You write with such tenderness about friendship and community. How have friends helped you see your story more clearly, especially during seasons of, as many of the stories in the, with regards to this were really around the season of grief? Take a moment.
Yeah. I think seasons of grief, maybe winter seasons, are more familiar to us because they stand out, because they're hard. We can't just autopilot our way through. I think in the book, my story was meant to serve as a medium, just as a vehicle, right? Because each of us have our own stories. It was never meant to be like, remember Jenn's story. It was like, would this alert you to your own? So they're really ordinary in many ways. But I think this idea that I had to learn to need people, and I write about that interconnectedness and interdependence, that has been unlearned. It's so counter to my culture that does live in the collective. So it's this fight of East and West, where the Eastern culture is more family and collective. And yet, I think to be human is still to not need too much, right? So you lent me a dozen eggs, so I need to make sure next time I give you back 15 eggs, a dozen and a half, right? I still can, so what does it mean in friendship where it isn't always even? It isn't always one for one, where I might receive more than I give. And that's hard for me. I'd rather outgive. I'd rather this honest, I'd rather not need too much. So as an oldest daughter of immigrants, who's just danced this my whole life, it's hard to turn that off. And so in our season of deepest grief as a family, to be so needy and so, in my mind, falling apart publicly, sure, check back with me in 10 years and I can have it maybe a little bit more wrapped up and a little bit more past tense, but it's unfolding. And I'm learning honesty in the moment, and friends still showed up for me and wanted to love us through. I think, oh, that's so humbling for someone who's really tried to be there for everyone else. It's really humbling to fall apart and to do so honestly, and then to just trust this place. So it's one thing to know, God, you love me, but then to know, God, you love me through people. And the friendships that have been the closest have been the ones that have they've been there for the honest reflection, and they haven't run. And even in spaces, I would say, they're not all, I think I gently wrote this, but they're not all, a lot of it has been white spaces for me. And that's also been a little jarring, to be to present even the parts that I fear people wouldn't necessarily relate to, but then I think to turn all those voices down and still show up, and trust that kingdom culture, friendship in the kingdom of God can look different. And while we may not all experience the same thing, and we definitely don't all experience life the same way, but what does love look like in this exchange of kingdom friendship?
Yeah.
And that I think that's the thing that I'm most, at this season, is I'm most passionate about, is seeing those kind of authentic, characterized by love, honesty. Those kinds of friendships are the ones that will last.
I think that's one term I will always keep in mind now. Kingdom friendships. I haven't heard that used like that before, but now it's got a special place in my heart. Thanks for sharing that. Storytelling often involves returning to memory. Was there any particular memory that you were surprised by when you stopped to reflect while you were writing this book?
So many stories, Sochi. I think when we begin to think, I think a lot of people who might not have the practice of storytelling might say, yeah, they're not that interesting, or they're just kind of, I don't really have any memories. But I think when we invite God in, and I write about in the presence of someone safe, that we can just begin to go, what stories? And I think the more, Monday night, we welcomed our first grandbaby.
Ooh, congratulations.
So I got to be with her, and we got to see this little one come into the world. And it was interesting because I told my daughter-in-law, I said, I'm so sorry I lied to you, because I said you'll never remember the pain once you're holding the baby, which is not true. Because as I was watching her in pain, my whole body just went into like, I remember what it was like. So it's interesting, I think, in these moments where our stories run into each other and we remember, right? So someone begins to tell a story and you're like, oh, I remember. So I remember, even my husband and I were reflecting on just some early memories of marriage. We've been married 30 years, and just some of those early feelings as I was driving around the area that I'm in. We used to live here, and no, we no longer do, but we used to live in this city that I'm in right now. And just some stuff was emerging that I didn't know. Some feelings were emerging around a season of life that was many years ago. And so I think, to your question, yes, so many, even if they're small, just, I remember feeling lonely in that season. I remember feeling incompetent or feeling insecure. And so some of it is just more around the feelings of, even as I drive around in California, which is where I am right now.
So let's talk about the sacredness of food and family, right? How's the act of preparing and sharing meals become a way of reclaiming identity and connection, and even spiritual inheritance?
Yes. The table is such a beautiful place. I think it just, when we look at even just Jesus and his final moments with his disciples, we see that picture of the table. We see Psalm 23, he prepares a table in the presence of our enemies. So we look at the theme of table throughout scripture. And yet I realized that the table for each of us wasn't the same. I recently met up with a friend, and they said, well, the table for me was like a little TV dinner tray that we each brought to our own rooms. And that was the table. And he's learning to bring his TV dinner tray out, metaphorically, and sharing. What is sharing around a big table? So for me, it was just this loud, crazy, not a table I was always very proud of, because it was just, we never knew who was going to be around the table, and it's big, and we all share dishes as opposed to like each ordering our own dish. Especially around Asian food, you don't order your own. That would be silly to order your own. You need to try out 15 dishes. If you've never experienced, I'm sure even just your own culture,
I'll take that as a lesson.
Oh my goodness. I thought, even moving to China, one thing the table, it doesn't even matter where it is. We would eat dinner in these very small one room studios, and they'd pull out a table from under the bed, and open it up, and somehow on a 2 burner gas stove in the balcony, which is all they had, friends would cook 15-course meals and watch us eat. And it's so humbling to be around a table where you're like, I could never offer this kind of meal, this kind of beauty, this kind of creativity, and yet to experience it. So I think it's been just such a journey of like learning to appreciate every table, even if it's just like, if it's like one dish we enjoy, if it's 30, if it's like it begins with soup and then ends with rice, because in Chinese culture, at the best of meals, rice is just to go in and fill the remainder of the cracks of your stomach that might not be full. We would not serve at a banquet, they don't serve rice and noodles until the very end. That is like just in case you're just a little bit hungry still, which is not even possible if you've experienced it all. So I think for me, as a kid, feeling so like this is so different than what my friends, this table does not represent anything my friends are eating. And yet, just in my growing up and into a reclaiming of that space, and then watching my own kids love the table, and the table just continues to be that metaphor for a place of meeting, a place of showing up. It's the centerpiece. I think I write that in one of my final chapters. It's the centerpiece of our family, and it's not a fancy one. But all those pen marks and oil stains and all of it just represent the people who've been around our table. And yeah, so continues to be an unfolding place.
It should be an emotional moment every time you share that or you think about it. And I remember, I mean, this really speaks to how our cultures, and earlier it said, your culture and mine shares huge similarities. Mm-hmm. One of them is, the coming together around food, around the table to eat. And we have a saying in our place that you don't. My mom will bite my head off if I don't get this right in our local dialect. But she's not she, but we say listen no be, meaning you don't finish eating. The literal translation is you don't finish eating in your own home. It's often said when you visit a neighbor or you visit another family, an extended family, and they ask you to come to the table to eat, and you don't, it's rude to say, oh, I ate at home. I ate at home. No, thank you. I ate at home. They weren't really asking you.
That's right. That's right.
It's rude. You have to eat because it's communion. It's a moment at the point of communion. Yes. We're inviting you to communion. It's not about filling your stomach. It's about we're inviting you to commune with us. And it dispels a lot of whatever feeling or aggravation, any aggravation you might have come in to that home with. This moment is a moment of sharing. And here and now, especially as an immigrant, and it's almost common practice, or it's a learned practice for children or families to eat wherever you are at. But hopefully, my wife and I will hopefully try and teach the kids this one moment when we have to eat. We have this one moment in the day when we come during dinner. We have to all eat at the table. And
yes,
we call it tea and conversation. When we finish food and then you have tea, okay, you don't want tea, you want water, fine, it's still tea and conversation.
Yes,
there's the point where we're going to all share. All right,
I love that.
And I, it takes me to this next point where I'm wondering, and I want to ask, in your role as a spiritual director, how do you guide others to discern God's hand in their own unfolding stories,
Mhm.
even in the messy and unresolved chapters.
Mhm. I think it's paying attention to God's presence. And if we can't feel it on our own, think in the presence of someone who has faith for it, that God shows up and we sense his presence. He's always there, but I think it's just discerning his presence. Um, I think as a spiritual director, I can be alongside just as a witness. The word director can feel a little bit confusing. I'm not directing. Holy Spirit is directing, but I'm just a companion in the space. And because I think God is not fussed with us in the way that we think he is. Going back, he loves us. Couldn't love us more. He gave himself for us. So he's here in the questions that we hold, the ones we don't even have words for, but we just feel in our bones. And often around suffering, whether it's our own personal suffering, the suffering of loved ones, or the suffering in the world. We're all holding it right now. And as a spiritual director, I think it's just coming and saying, I know that he's here. And I know that we can wander, we can we can ask the question, we can be in silence, we can wait. And usually I ask, like, what's stirring in your heart, even as we come, trusting that something is. And not everybody knows what is until we begin talking. And then, usually, somewhere in our time together, I might just say, would you like to take a moment of silence and just ask God what he might want to say to you in this moment? And it's interesting to have silence with another. I'm okay. We just turn off. Sometimes we turn off our mics and cameras, and sometimes we're just there. And sometimes half the time is silence. But somehow knowing that someone is with you, I've just experienced it meeting with my own spiritual director, but also as I meet with people, like this power of being together in the messy, in the question, and what might feel like darkness or wilderness. But because God's presence is here with us, there's just something very profound and sacred. And so that might we might ask a question of, like, I always ask, like, where are you feeling it, in your body, even as you start to speak again. And is there a story that this reminds you of, or what's the undercurrent? Sometimes we're talking here, we're recounting a story of what just happened, but is there a moment in your own story that this reminds you of? Do you remember feeling this sense of fear, or this tummy pain, or this back tightness? And we pause and we wait. And sometimes we do story and sometimes we don't. But I think we can't necessarily do it well on our own. We need someone alongside us. It doesn't need to be an expert. I think we can heal without having any of the answers. Even just you and I meeting today, there's something profound that God is healing, because I know, wow, Sochi comes from such a culture so different yet so similar around some key things that I felt as a kid that I was the only one, right? And then as I get older, I realize, oh, part of it's just human, and then some of it is just the beauty of being an immigrant, or my family's migration story. So it's just, I think sometimes there'll be like major aha moments, and then sometimes it's just like, oh, I'll think about that. I'll take some time to bring that before God, or I'll journal about that. And yeah.
I know earlier I spoke about how the book closes beautifully on a gratitude or grateful note, or a note of gratitude. And the reason I said that was because it was more or less the epoch of the book, and where you tie everything together. And uh, if someone listening is feeling uncertain about their story, perhaps even ashamed or discouraged, what encouragement would you offer? How can they begin to see their story as a blessed one?
Mm. I think find someone that you can journey with, um, who will listen, someone who you trust won't just throw Christian answers at you, or even, while the Bible is so important and the scripture is so important, that I think sometimes it is used as a weapon, um, to get someone out of their pain. And I think knowing what wisdom looks like in those moments. But I think what I would say is, don't do this alone. And you're not alone. Shame threatens to steal everything that God is doing that is beautiful in our lives. The minute there's like this, maybe a little bit of light or a little bit of honesty, shame threatens to steal. And I think recognizing, I'm not going to let that do that right now. But even naming it, I think I talk a lot about articulating and naming our story, naming what's happening. Like, even to say, I feel shame right now, is to bring it out of the closet, and just say, will I let it? Will I let it have power over me? No. Or texting a friend, I met with someone, I shared a little bit of my story that felt really uncomfortable, and I want to go back into hiding. Even that confession, that's what I want to do. And I'm just saying it out loud. And I need you just to hold me here. When we can name shame, that gives it less power. Gives it less power, and it also brings us in connection. So connection is also a way in which we can, connection with God and with another is a way, is an antidote, right? But ourselves, we can't do it on our own. So I think when if any of you listening would think, well, couldn't possibly begin to be honest because it's too shameful. I just think, this is where I would say we are more loved than we could ever imagine, every single one of us. And gratitude is a fruit that emerges, and it cannot be, like, I began the book with saying, people just said, Jen, be thankful. And I couldn't find my thankful heart right away. And that's okay. It's okay, because I think true gratitude doesn't mean that, people have said to me, about my husband's cancer, like, oh, isn't cancer so good? And I think, no, I don't ever have to say cancer was good. I don't ever have to say the suffering is good. I don't ever have to say whatever it is, because only you, the person in it, is the only person that can say this was the gift. Yeah, we don't get to do that for another. But I'm going to come alongside you and believe that God is doing good things. I can believe that. And I believe that he will finish the work that he started in each of us, and that he will love us all the way to the end, however long that our lives will be. So I shared the gratitude, and it continues, I think, as a mom, you want your kids to be thankful, and sometimes we force the thankfulness out. And sometimes it's just a practice and we just learn to be thankful. But from that deep place that emerges, the gratitude that emerges is out of, we have to wrestle through so many things. So I think at my point in my season, my husband has another CT scan next week. So we're still in it. It's not over. It's not past tense. And I can be and yet I can say, thank you, Lord, for this day. And thank you and that comes from a very deep place. But there's times where I don't want to be thankful. There's times where I'm not I'm not praising him. And the choice to praise feels like sacrifice, which scripture says it's a sacrifice of praise and of thanksgiving. It's an offering. So I think it is this yes and ever unfolding um, journey towards heaven.
Thank you, Jen. And one of the traditions on this show is to ask a few light-hearted questions.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'm not going to ask for your secret family recipe. I'm not going to do that. What are you reading? What do you have on your bedside right now to read?
Oh, I'm the girl that has a stack of books.
Really? Do you read many books at the same time?
I do. So when I was writing, I didn't read a lot because I just needed to figure out what my voice was.
Yeah.
But I always have a stack. I'm not a very, I'm reading a book called Strangers in the Land about Chinese American, the migration story of Chinese Americans starting in the early 1800s. That's painful, fascinating, and giving me cause to think. So it's a very thick book. I'm reading The Deeply Rooted Marriage. My husband and I are celebrating our 30th in just a week, and just love continuing to grow and learn. And what else am I reading? I think I pulled off an old book. This on my son's bookshelf, Crazy Rich Asians, just for fun. So just I don't always read lighthearted books because I'm always trying to learn and think, and sometimes I think I just have to. It's okay to not be so deep.
Thanks for that. What is one comfort food? What is your go-to comfort food?
I would say jok. Jok is a porridge. It's a rice porridge, and reminds me of my grandmother, and it reminds me my mom made it for us every time we came back from Asia back to the States. I always knew what mom would have prepared, and I find myself preparing that for my kids, and my daughter-in-laws who are not Asian, they love it as well. So I would say jok.
And that's a beautiful way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Jen. This has been very insightful and inspiring. Thank you for taking out the time to talk to us. And I pray that the book brings light into people's lives and their stories, just as you intend. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sochi.